Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food, to disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims? Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilkas and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason.
Welcome to Road to Reason. We can't see ourselves, but we're going to trust that we're on there. I'm Rob Penzak. I've been hosting this show for a few years. I run a program in Richmond called Saved by Science that tries to bring stuff to the secular, skeptical, atheist, humanist, and scientific communities. I'm here with Paul Sheehan, the executive producer of Road to Reason, and we have a great guest coming back on. Do you want to tell who he is and why we've got him back?
Yeah, we're having Baba Brinkman back on our show, and for those who watched our previous episode where he was on, we had him on because he has some really ass-kicking awesome lyrics and is really a good musician, promotes humanism, skepticism, atheism. But I saw him at Reason Rally, and I saw him in person, and I saw him up on the stage, and I said, oh man, we missed this huge chunk of this guy. He did more of kind of like, he did his music and his rap music, but he also would like take pauses and kind of like talk about, you know, the science behind the music and the rap that he was doing. He would talk about history. He'd talk about, the type of efforts, research and stuff that he would do that really kind of went into those lyrics. And it took it to a whole new level for me. It wasn't just good, cool sounding music that kind of spoke to me. I kind of got a real dose that this guy is really invested in what he does. And I said, I really don't want to focus on the music so much this time. I want to really focus on the guy, why he does what he does, the work and the effort that he puts into it.
I think there's a phenomenal effort that he puts behind the scenes, which is why it works on stage, that very few people are going to be willing to, or maybe have the capacity to do that, digest it, absorb it, and then, as Bill Nye said, spit it back out. So we are really excited to have him on. He does great work, and so we'll bring him back in just a few minutes. Absolutely.
We got some news and announcements. The first thing I do is I want to let the viewers know we're in an upgrade on our computer system here, so if there's a little bit of glitch here and there today, please bear with us. We're not streaming live because of that, and we do apologize for that. The other thing I want to do is thank Rob Penzak, who came down from Richmond today, who was dealing with somebody who crashed into his parked car in front of his house, and I want to thank his wife for putting up with his trip down here. He really, it's an hour or more drive fighting traffic to get down here to do the show, and I want to thank you for that. It means a lot.
That's very good critical thinking, and all of us really should always keep this in mind, that the spouses of any activist bear an untold load that only the people in the midst of it really know about. So cutting out in the middle of that is a little problematic, so hopefully they're doing okay there.
But honey,
Paul made me come.
I got the show to do. I can't not do the show. All
right.
So you also have the news, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I got some news too.
All right. Well, I guess we're going to talk mostly about Ken Ham, Answers in Genesis, the ARC project that just opened up.
Yeah, but you had, and for the technical director, we have the pictures queued up. You have a guy who you wanted to talk about, the secular thinker of the week. And
oh, yes, right. So we'll get to the news right after that. Another segment that we do a secular person of the week, we do a secular joke of the week. So last night, in the midst of all of the chaos, what happened to some young drunk driver came, smashed through our neighbor's yard, into our car, into a little part of our house, into two cars right next door to us. And then they were basically trying to get away afterward. As you can imagine, as you know, a collection of 8 or 10 of us sort of gathered there and calling the police, calling 911, because we, you know, in the beginning don't know if somebody's hurt or what's going on exactly. It's very easy to get hostile, to think, hey, they're doing this, they're trying to get away with it, how bad, how, you know, there's a lot of that animosity that's generated. So in the midst of this, there was a party the night before at my neighbor's house where his friend Kirkpatrick Capers, so Kirk and my neighbor Sam were football players together in high school, in college. They still, you know, get together, still have a nice relationship 10, 20 years later. And so he was down for this. He's also a veteran. And kind of in the midst of this, when people are getting a little maybe overly worked up and, you know, too concerned with stuff, our stuff, point out, you know, we really do not know this girl's story. And so, you know, it just sort of helps diffuse things a little bit. And I just thought it was one of the most empathetic statements in the middle of a bad situation, where, you know, you could see he was calm, he was very tuned into what was going on. I'm sure he's ready to act. He's the exact person you would always want to have your back. And for him to have that perspective, you know, he's had some life experiences of his own. You know, this just tied into some other things we were talking about the night before with police brutality and then the shooting against the police. And there's a lot of, you know, with all the racial things going on. And I just thought he's one of those unsung heroes that people aren't going to know about. And so I would like people to know, you know, if you, I think it's in Pennsylvania, if you know Kirkpatrick Capers, say hi, say you really appreciate him when nobody's going to know about it, really doing the right thing. It's always hard to say something like if your friends are talking one way, confronting your friends, or just, you know, bringing it, brought it very gently. It was just perfect. But anyway, so he really earned my respect. He did a wonderful thing in the situation.
And I think, you know, it's an example that humanists in our community really should follow. We have so many flame wars going on right now on the internet between social justice warriors and anti-social justice warriors, and I suspect behind each camp there are people who really want to do the right thing, who actually do care about people, but it just degenerates into just such nasty, competitive, hate-filled rants. And it's just like your friend was saying, you know, we don't really know this person's story, and if we all just take a little bit of time to get to know people and not impose judgments on them right away, and you know, be humanists, I think we get a lot further in the world. So I think that is certainly worth a secular plug for the week.
Yeah, and I always thought I was a social justice warrior until now I've seen what it means and how it ties in with the regressive left, where you're so quick to brand people. We are getting pounded on. Yeah. I could not say what's going on here.
Well, and it's again, you know, I've always taken the position social justice issues are important. And as someone who identifies as a humanist, I'm always looking for a way to connect. I think there are certain people who identify themselves as social justice warriors that take things too far, who become regressive, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a value in being involved in social justice issues. And I think our community has to find that avenue of how we sort the chaff from, you know, from the wheat and figure that out. But I do want to switch gears because we only have a few minutes left, and I kind of want to get to the Ken Ham and the ARC news. So for people who are following the internets, Ken Ham has completed his $100 million Noah's Ark replica.
That's our Noah's Ark.
Oh yes, ours, because he got an $18 million tax break from it. Now here's the kicker. We're going to have 2 sets of pictures up. We're going to have 2 different sets of arcs. The first one is the one that Ken Ham did. He's out with his little hat, his little hard hat, because we all know Noah had a hard hat. That's how they did things in biblical times. They wore hard hats. And something else, you know, when you look at these pictures, it's just inescapable. Is the first, you know, is that they're building this thing with plywood, pressure treated wood. They're building it with Tyvek, like reinforced steel bolts, and cranes, because, you know, Noah had gasoline operated, powered cranes to build his ark, and it took how many years was it? Like 6 years?
Yeah, I think 6 years with the modern technology.
6 years with the modern technology. Now I have to fully admit that I don't have the study in front of me. I do vaguely remembering a study, and I think if anybody researches it, they'll find that this is either accurate or very close to being accurate. Somebody did a study, and they figured if you took 9 people that were able-bodied and you had them work 7 days a week, 16 hours a day, but as Rob eloquently pointed out earlier, you have to keep the Sabbath holy, so you can only work 6 days. But if you work 7 days, it would take you about 30 years to build a Noah's Ark. And because they didn't have pressure-treated wood back then, by the time you were completing the end of Noah's Ark, the first half of it would have already started to rot away. So it would be
unless you have a miracle working on your side.
Unless you have a miracle working on your and termites not eating it and all the other things that could go wrong. Absolutely bunk. But the kicker was Kent Hovind showed up, and so did Aaron Ra, and they had a little debate out in front of this, and I thought it was kind of comical because Kent Hovind, Aaron's talking about all the absurdities of how ridiculous. First of all, this thing's built not to spec. So as I think Ken Ham has even admitted, this thing is not seaworthy. That this is more of a museum.
Well, he pointed out that God and Noah had a covenant that God would never smite us again with a global flood, so it doesn't need to float.
Doesn't actually need to float.
The irony, as we'll talk about with global warming, maybe it would have been better if it could float and carry it.
Yeah, exactly. But the interesting thing is that Ken Hovind was like, so you think we're from apes, which is supposed to be this kind of gotcha thing, and actually Aaron goes, do you have a tail? Mm-hmm. And Ken was like, no. He goes, well, I got news for you, friend. Out of the two types of primary primates we're definitely apes if you don't have a tail. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was kind of cute. Now the second picture we're going to show.
Just to jump there for a second though, part of the problem is when, and this is where street epistemology I want to give a plug, when you have a factual debate over stuff, it doesn't advance the discussion in a sense, because all of the science-minded secularists are already rooting them on, and they know that and they get it.
Yeah.
And the other side, it's like they don't absorb that point in a meaningful way. So
this is true.
It rallies the troops in some ways, but it doesn't necessarily get the other side to understand the argument. He clearly didn't understand the argument.
Yeah, or he does, and for either monetary or entertainment purposes, he does what he does. And I got to wrap this up quickly. The second series of Ark pictures we have was one that actually did float, and it hit a Norwegian Coast Guard cutter, which I think we showed this picture on the show before. What I find amazing is that this thing's got a metal hull. It's like, because back in biblical times, and what was interesting is it's smaller than Ken Ham's Noah's Ark. But what's interesting is I think it came in at like 210 feet, 211 feet, and it has a metal hull. And what people don't understand is anything larger than that, a wood hull, would not be seaworthy. So actually right there, by building this thing, they've already conceded that no such ark could have existed because they can't actually build it with wood any larger. Yeah. It's ridiculous. But anyway, we're getting ready to go to our PSAs because we're already over on time. So let's go ahead and do that so we can get to Baba.
We're going to end with our one-sentence joke of the week. Skywatch, which looks like a legitimate site, pseudo-legitimate site, but not a spoof site, dubbed the Ark like the the ultimate floater or something. And they didn't quite understand
the ultimate floater.
Anyway, all right.
There you go.
Moving on. We'll see Baba in just about 2-3 minutes.
A critical thinker is in a frame of mind of always questioning everything, including things they don't necessarily want to question. You may have done some research and satisfied yourself on a position you're sure is right. Good. Now, after a month or two of that, go look at some research that opposes your point of view or challenges the position you've taken. You can even look into it with the idea of poking holes in their arguments if you want, but it would be better to just have an open mind and read it as though you'd never heard or seen anything on the issue before. You may be very surprised what you learn, and if you're doing this right, you will be. Always be open to opposing points of view and counter arguments. That's what critical thinking is all about. And now you know.
Good.
Homemade noodles. Marty, stop it. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. It reminds me, I've been thinking maybe we should try a new form of birth control. I heard about this one, it's called the IUD, intrauterine device. Or we could try the patch on your arm. Actually, I think that one goes in your butt.
Bedsider.org has birth control information and a lot more. And it's...
What do you think then? Arm or the butt?
There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube. And remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Body language can tell you all sorts of things. Like someone is having a stroke. Know the sudden signs. Learn fast. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Time to call 911 and get them to a hospital immediately. Learn the body language and spot a stroke fast.
We are flying a little blind, but I think we've got the timing down here. Most shows that aren't as top-notch as Road to Reason, Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century, when they make a mistake, they don't correct it for weeks. We make enough mistakes here, we like to hammer them out right away. So it was not Skywatch TV News, it was actually Apologetics Press article by Kyle Butt with the Master of Divinity, who called Noah's Ark a flawless floater. Skywatch TV News, which is also not a spoof, was on bragging how they were now going to go and talk to some of the scientists working for Answers in Genesis about the Ark, so I had those a little jumbled up. So now we've got Baba Brinkman. Baba, can you hear us?
I can, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on. So people, if you are interested in Baba's work, go back and take a look in March of 2015. He was on here. We're going to try to cover some different territory today. There are a couple things I do want to touch on that you hit a little bit last time. Now, one thing that you did is you had a BBC interview, and you talked about why you do what you do, and you had a great answer about what you're trying to achieve with the secular atheist audience and what you're trying to achieve with the religious audience. Can you break down what you're looking for?
Sure. So that was specifically about my show, The Rap Guide to Religion, which is about how religion evolved as a sort of adaptive set of instincts and behaviors in our species, evolved both genetically and culturally. And I have an atheistic perspective in it, in that I'm trying to explain religion without reverting to the supernatural in any way. So in a way, that sounds like I'm trying to convert religious people to atheism. One of the things I'm trying to do is present to them the evolutionary view and show how sort of well-researched and thought out and sensible it seems in terms of explaining things that would otherwise seem pretty baffling. But I wasn't just trying to sort of shoot in one direction and convert all the believers into non-believers. I also wanted to reach out to atheists and, in a way, make them appreciate religion for some reason, if not necessarily the details of the supernatural beliefs, which I think are all sort of counterfactual. But I think, just the message that religion may not be true, but that doesn't mean it isn't necessarily useful. I think that is actually something that a lot of atheists would benefit by considering and accepting. And I've actually, surprisingly had a really positive response from religious people about that show, and not really had much hostility, because I think they're not used to an atheist saying, you're not used to an atheist saying anything nice about religion. Even if I'm saying religion's not true, I'm saying it did something for some people throughout the history of our species, which is why it became so ingrained. Doesn't necessarily mean it's doing much good today, but it also means that it's probably more than just a pernicious delusion or some kind of psychosis.
Right, and also I think there's a lot of empathy in that statement, that instead of us being angry at everybody who still has religion in their lives, to understand there's a whole context that it developed from, and all of us, again, have different life stories. And I was raised as a Reformed Jew. It's very easy for me to walk away from religion. Half of secular Jews, For somebody else in other communities, it's really, really difficult. It has real consequences. And so that's a separate thing from the utility that some people find in religion. Anyway, I think it's a great approach.
Well, just to follow up on that, I think a lot of atheists go around a little too proud of themselves for like having discovered the light of reason, which I think disregards the degree to which sort of subconscious priming may have played a role in the way their religious beliefs changed. And there's some fascinating experiments where you can, ask people questions about their degree of religiosity and the degree of certainty in their faith, and how much they believe something is literally true versus metaphorically true. And if you show them certain primes before you ask those questions, you can actually experimentally manipulate the degree to which people are religious. You can make people less religious. You can make them profess lower certainty in their beliefs by priming them in certain ways. So, maybe the atheists that think they discovered reason and are now correct thinkers actually were exposed to some environmental primes that signaled to them subconsciously that religion was no longer adaptive in their current environment. And there's an evolutionary reason for how they think now too, So that's why I think there's a humility in thinking about it that way and looking at that data.
Yeah, I think approach is something that far few atheists really think about. We've had individuals on the show before that do street epistemology, and you can literally see the change sometimes right within the interview, where they ask, to what degree are you certain, and then the person will pose questions, and the degree actually will change within a matter of 5 minutes. And so it's certainly a new way to approach addressing religion, and that's one of the things I really liked about your performance, which is that you didn't tear down religious people. You promoted science, you talked about history, you talked about biology. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what type of research and effort and preparation. You have two types of preparation you obviously have to do for a show. You have to do the performance side, and then you have to do the scientific side. And I was wondering if you talk a little bit about each of those and how you prepare for your shows.
Sure. Well, the scientific side definitely has to come first. So each time I do a show, I'm spending somewhere between 3 and 6 months reading up on the literature of whatever that subject is. And I'm kind of treasure mining it, looking for the kernels and the tidbits that I think are going to make a good stepping off point for some kind of entertainment experience. Because when I'm doing the live show, it's comedy and rap and then some elements of a TED Talk kind of format, but it's got to be fun for people and it's got to work minute to minute. There can't be 10 boring minutes in between some fun sections. It really because I'm doing the shows off Broadway in New York and we're selling tickets, and it's got to sort of hold its own against the entertainment industry here. That's the bottom line for when I create a show, is it's got to be a fun, entertaining show. It just happens to convey all the information you need to understand a whole scientific or research field. So, at first there's the sort of data mining side of it. And then once I have all my highlighted bits, then I'm okay, well, check this out. Isn't this cool? Or have you thought about this? Or what does that suggest about this thing that you know about in pop culture or in music, or, finding those sort of relatable moments.
One of the things I noticed about your performance was, and you just pointed this out, you go from comedy to a TED Talk to a rap. How do you feel that impacts your performance? Do you feel that because I actually, and this is my take on it, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it, I actually liked it. When you did your rap stick, it was put in a perspective because you did talk about the meaning behind it and the research that would go into it, and you did it in a way that was funny and humorous. Do you think if you just did pure rap music that it would be any different, or do you think that this is what makes it cohesive?
I think it works better when I frame it like that. I think when I write rap, it's almost like meta rap as much as rap itself, because it's always sort of about not just the subject, but about itself and how it came about. And, it's designed to make the audience think about what they're experiencing and the reaction they're having and why. So I feel like setting it up it definitely makes people get a lot more out of it and see it through new eyes. Now, I don't do that in every show. Honestly, I'm doing the Rap Guide to Climate Chaos off Broadway right now, and for that show, I made a sort of editorial decision to not do the TED Talk style lecture preamble. So this show is 80 minutes long, and it's pretty much all rap songs back to back. But what I did instead is the pieces where I would normally set up and create context, I just wrote those into raps as well. So there's sort of the songs about climate change, and then there's the songs about the ideas that I followed in order to get into this next song about climate change. It's hard to say which works better, but I kind of, for me, it was kind of like I wanted to challenge myself to create something that was a complete immersive experience where it's all in rhyme from beginning to end. I've done 2 shows like that, and I've done 3 actually. I've done 3 shows that are rhyme end to end, and I've done 4 or 5 where I do a rap and then do some comedy preamble setup and then do another rap. And both ways work. It's just
Baba, can I get you to do me a favor real quick? Can you just turn your volume down a little bit? We're getting some feedback from you as it's cycling through. That's fine. Yeah. One of the things, and I know I'm stealing all the time here, so actually, why don't we let Rob ask a question?
Yeah, so maybe, I know Paul has a question related to this. Can you talk a little bit about the history that you draw from? Like the idea of using rhymes and rhythm and helping stuff stick, where does that come from? Because I think it's incredibly effective, and maybe you can help teach some other people that are looking to educate people in a way that works well.
Well, I can't take total credit for that art form. Actually, I can't take any at all. Hip-hop culture started in the Bronx in New York and spread to the 5 boroughs and then spread to the whole country and then the whole world. So my background is that I'm from Vancouver, Canada, and we had hip-hop in my community growing up, and it was the music of choice for most of the young people that I grew up with. And I just always found it incredibly compelling as a storytelling medium. Like, here's a group of people that I don't have firsthand interactions with, urban African Americans, and yet I can sort of see through their eyes and hear their stories about what their experiences are like. Their experiences having been very different from mine, because I grew up in a much safer sort of suburban environment, and also sometimes rural as well, because I did tree planting, and my family does like forestry work in Canada as well. So I couldn't have really grown up any further from the sort of site of origin of hip hop music, but I did just recognize it as an incredibly sort of sophisticated and compelling art form. And I wanted to learn it and master it and try to apply it to things that nobody was applying it to so far. So that was right from the beginning. I was like, I'm gonna master the art of rap, and I'm gonna use it to rap about things that no one even thought you could rap about. And one of the first things I did that with was Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which sort of was where I got my start career-wise. I wrote an adaptation of Chaucer and toured it for several years around England and Australia and the US, and it was sort of bringing medieval literature to the masses. And then after a couple of years of doing that, some scientists started reaching out to me and saying, you think you could use rap to explain this or explain that? So then that was the origins of this whole Rap Guide series, which is mostly like a science communication project. But I'm 37 now. I've been rapping since I was 19, and I still see rap as this really just sort of unparalleled, effective way to get a message across and be memorable and impactfful and entertaining. But I also relate that to the literary canon. I think rappers are the Shakespeares of today, and the lyricism is what people are drawn to, and they love to have their sort of mind stimulated by cleverness and wordplay and the sort of verbal fireworks effect. So that's what I'm always going for.
Yeah, and I think with your background in the classics, because I thought you talked about how you can go back to Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey, and all of our original stuff was done in oral tradition and the poetry that's now incorporated into rap. So I think you really do draw on a very rich tradition. Rap has a bad name in some communities, and we're hoping that's really breaking through into the critical thinking community, because you, Tombstone, Graydon Square, there's a bunch of people now that really address really serious issues and important stuff. Have you seen any movement? Are you getting more traction in the critical thinking community?
Well, ironically, I didn't know there was a critical thinking community until about 2009. So honestly, I didn't even identify as an atheist when I first started doing science rap. I called myself an agnostic, although on reflection, I decided at a certain point that I was just being politically correct and sort of trying to avoid arguments by saying agnostic. So that's for the past sort of 6 or 7 years I've been claiming atheist because I think it's a more intellectually honest description of what I am.
Yeah, and just to jump in, as a performer, I would say that's an incredibly courageous thing to do, because you, more than most people, if people are bigoted against atheists, they're not going to come see your show. You're really accepting that personal hit and being honest, and you help everybody. Dave Silverman talks about this all the time. If you're an atheist, say you're an atheist, it helps all the rest of us. So we appreciate that for the community.
Yeah, well, I think Dawkins made a really good case for that in The God Delusion, that there is a sort of coming out effect that's a very good analogy to the LGBT community, where people are emboldened when they see others doing it and suffering the hits, whatever the hits are. I don't know if I really suffered that many. I probably got into a bunch of arguments about religion and metaphysics with my new agey friends in Canada. But it wasn't like I had a community that was going to banish me like I was a Jehovah's Witness or something. I didn't have as far. I was like, okay, I'm coming out of the closet as an atheist. I'm not agnostic anymore. A lot of people are like, hold on, what's the big difference? But the difference between people who know you, they don't see that as a huge leap. But when you meet someone for the first time and they ask you about your religious beliefs and you say agnostic, they feel safe. And if you say atheist, they feel threatened if they're religious. So that's where the difference is. You have to be willing to accept the reality of this is going to make people uncomfortable, or you're going to be questioned more fiercely. Like, how can you really believe that? How do you get up in the morning? What do you think is going to happen after you die? And you have to be comfortable having this conversation where you say, actually, I don't think there's anything after we die. Consciousness is extinguished. There's no soul. This makes people profoundly uncomfortable when you start saying that. But
I think Harvey Milk, who led the coming out movement in California for gays in that community, had talked about, there's the type of people who get hit for it, but it also becomes an opportunity for you to humanize who your community is. They're going to learn that you don't eat babies. You're not the monster that they've been told that you are, and the next time they meet someone who's an atheist, they might not be so quick to judge that person. So there's a certain value of being an ambassador. That people definitely want to take that into consideration when they call themselves an atheist. They are opening a door for civilized communication.
And you reach a very different audience. That's one of the things that I absolutely love about rap and music and using this. There's a certain set of people that are sitting there reading Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss and Christopher Hitchens, and they're already on board with almost all of this. There are other people that are not bad people, but just really not aware. And I've had this, as I've become much more activist, I actually just had a chance to talk to a group of seminarians about street epistemology. It was a wonderful, private little session, 11 people or so. And some of the stuff that comes up, it's not out of vitriol, it's out of not understanding. And so you really do put a different face on atheism, on your whole thought process behind stuff, and it's incredibly helpful.
I wanted to ask you, in your work, have you ever had somebody that's watched one of your shows, either that day or later on, said, man, you really changed the way I think. Your music made a real impact.
Yeah, I get that. I get people coming up to me after my current show about climate change off Broadway and say, I came into this show a climate skeptic thinking it was not a big deal and it was all hype, and now I think it's a really serious issue that we're going to have to address. And I've had several people say you completely changed my view on this. If you look at my YouTube channel, there's some great comments from people who said, I was religious until I listened to your music, and now I'm coming out as an atheist too, and stuff like that. Or I didn't understand evolution, or I didn't believe in it. And I for my Rap Guide to Evolution show, my goal was not to turn people into atheists. I happen to agree with Dawkins that if you understand evolution top to bottom, there really isn't much left in terms of a basis for having any supernatural belief, because evolution is just so sort of explanatorily complete and satisfying as an account for everything. So I know that everyone doesn't agree with that, but when I created the Rap Guide to Evolution, I didn't say atheist anywhere in the show. I just said, let me show you how amazing this theory is and how vast its explanatory power is, and get you excited about how good it feels to feel like things make sense that were previously baffling. And if you follow that line and you come out the other side saying, okay, well, now the things I used to attribute to God, I don't need to anymore, then great, but that wasn't my main purpose. With Rap Guide to Religion, it was more like, okay, here's a charm offensive for atheism. I'm going to show you why we're not devils, and actually, why it's allows you to be more accepting of religion in a way because you understand the evolutionary context of it. But when you asked before about the critical thinking community, that was this odd experience for me where I wrote this Rap Guide to Evolution show, an album. I put the CD out on iTunes. People started downloading it and sharing it, and I didn't know there was an atheist community or a critical thinking community. I had never heard of Skeptics in the Pub or CFI or any of this stuff, So they started just coming out of the woodwork being like, yeah, you're leading the way for our free thinking culture. And I'm like, free thinking culture? What are you talking about? I was just like, I hadn't come across any of this. I was just like recruited by a biologist to explain evolution, and suddenly I found that the atheist community was my fan base. So then I started to sort of read up on what their position was, and I was like, okay, well, I kind of agree with all this, so I guess I'm one of you.
You kind of would, yeah.
Didn't write it for the purpose of playing to that crowd. It was more like, let me explain evolution to the masses, especially people who don't get it. And it's the critical thinking community that's already on board and that's sort of excited about it.
So some religious people think that as soon as you start to go into all of the science, you strip the beauty out of nature and the mystery is gone. Have you noticed anything as an artist now that you have, I assume, just hearing how rigorous you are in your preparation for this stuff and your communication, I'd like you to talk about with some of the lead scientists. Do you feel you lose anything? Do you lose any grit or any edge, or is it just total upside? The more you understand it, the better show and performance you can give?
Well, I'm in an unusual position in that my material is about science and the world of ideas. So I don't think I lose anything from it, because I can always create this meta context of this is helping you understand what you're experiencing in this exact moment. Therefore, it's like a self-reinforcing benefit. If I was just doing love songs and I was doing a bunch of evolutionary psychology research before writing my love song, I could see how that might actually undermine it, because there's certain aspects of romance, let's say, in which delusions are more adaptive than
that's not good honeymoon material, honey. I love you because.
But I think on balance, knowing is better than not knowing, and there's very few areas where you can make a good case for ignorance being beneficial. I think I don't think the arts are one of them. I do think there's a natural tendency of artists to be a little bit more spiritual or superstitious, honestly, because I think if their lives, go a certain way, like if they get successful as artists, they feel like there's got to be a supernatural guiding hand in that, because art seems to come from such an intangible place. And even as an artist myself, I still can't dig down that deep, although the things that I used to say, this is divine inspiration, when I was more agnostic, then I'll say, well, this is my subconscious doing work that I don't have access to. But it's good to keep in mind that like 90+% of your brain's activities are not accessible to your conscious awareness, and that is more than enough to account for where we get flashes of inspiration without needing a supernatural realm. So that shift in thinking, I don't think, has made my inspirations less accessible.
Yeah, I know. I have a lot of crap swirling around up in my head that I just don't know where these ideas come from. But I wanted to ask you real quickly too about, so there's two questions I want to ask. The first is, being a white guy who does rap, have you run into any hostility with that? If so, how do you handle it? The second question is, have you had anybody who's religious that came to one of your performances that was like, what the hell did I just watch? And was completely taken aback by it?
I've had, to answer the second one first, I've had religious people saying I expected to really hate this and be offended by it, and I ended up liking it a lot. I've had religious people say, I don't agree with you, but I enjoyed the experience, and that's my best response that I can get from a religious person whose ideas are being conflicted by what I'm saying, because I think it takes a lot of the hostility out of the dialogue when you can say, well, I don't agree with the person, but I appreciate where they're coming from, and that's what I'm going for. As for the hip hop thing, the response that I've gotten has been really positive, and African Americans have generally been initially skeptical, let's say, understandably, because there's appropriation out there and there's disrespect. But I've really always tried to come from a perspective of, I'm not claiming that I invented this art form. I totally acknowledge where it came from, and I'm trying to be I'm trying to be as well versed as I can on the culture and take it in an entirely new direction. And I have one line in my Rap Guide to Climate Chaos show that tries to sum that up, which is a true quote. There's a rapper from a group called the Living Legends. He's affiliated with Hieroglyphics. His name is Aesop Fables, Aesop the Living Legend. And I showed him one of my music videos a couple years ago, and his reaction was, dope, this is dope. This is exactly the kind of rap music white people should be doing. I cracked up and I was like, man, I'm going to quote you on that, because, I think it like, let's be honest, my rap is the whitest rap you can imagine. I definitely don't put on any kind of street persona or try to do the inflections of the rappers that have schooled me, because I just acknowledge that my background is different, and I'm like, these are the things that I find fascinating, and this is this art form I've been inspired by, and this is how I'm going to put them together. And I think a lot of African Americans have seen too many white rappers just trying to act like 50 Cent and Snoop and not really acknowledge their own story or where they came from personally. And I think that they get tired of that. I think that's what Aesop's message was really. It was a funny comment because there's some truth in it, but it was kind of like dismissing, but also like and also respectful at the same time. It's one of those odd, like I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or a diss, but I liked the compliment side of it enough that I was happy to shrug off the diss. That's what I'm going for, is for have people to have a holy crap, I never even knew something like this could exist kind of reaction.
So you're not a Canadian Vanilla Ice, is what you're saying. Right.
Well, I think there was a Canadian Vanilla Ice, and his name was Snow, and his song was called Informer. But since I first started rapping, I've always been hyper aware of the Vanilla Ice phenomenon and how I need to make sure I'm not that. Okay. But I started rapping about a year before we first encountered this MC called Marshall Mathers, and so when I first started rapping, the landscape was bleak. I was like, there are no good white rappers, and by definition, if I'm a white rapper, Vanilla Ice is going to be the first reference for everybody, and that sucks because he's obviously a joke. And then Eminem came out, and then I was like, oh, thank goodness, a white rapper that doesn't suck. Now at least there's going to be a frame of reference for everybody. On the other hand, now you inevitably can't tell people you're a white rapper without them being like, oh, you mean like Eminem? So, that's a double-edged sword too.
All right, so as I suggest a future Baba Brinkman study that you put together with neuroscience. Andy Thompson's been on the show a few times. He wrote Why We Believe in God, the Science Behind Faith, and he talks about song, dance, and trance, and these are constitutive elements of all the original religions and how powerful they are. And that's something that, even before rap, this is how we communicate, and you get people singing, chanting, swaying together and doing these things. It triggers all this neurochemistry that makes it connect and helps you teach the message that you're trying to get across. So, it's really cool. Sorry.
That was one of the things. This is a perfect example where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a show about religion. Let's read up on the science of religion. And then I read some of this literature on trance and dance and sort of ritualistic group movement. And I was like, oh, this couldn't be more perfect, because I'm using rap to explain the science of religion. And it turns out that rap and religion have very common tactics and practices that have the effect of moving people in a collective scenario and giving them an emotional rush for a purpose. In rap, it's generally for a purpose of giving them a good time, like having a party or being entertained. In religion, it's bonding them as a community and creating this sense of we're part of something bigger than ourselves. But then you can do the concert moments of the show and then be like, you see that thing that you just felt when I did that? Well, now you understand religion. And there's something visceral about that's going to do a lot more than just reading it on the page.
Absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit about the meat and potatoes potatoes of what I saw at Reason Rally. I got so many questions I'd like to ask you, but we only have about 14 minutes left. Three of the topics that you covered I thought were really cool was is the evolutionary I don't know what you would call it, the redback spider, because it's one of those kind of things that seems evolutionary. You talked a little bit about peacocks versus rappers and their bling bling, and then you also talked a little bit about the gay gene and how religious people actually, by repressing homosexuals and forcing them to be at least appear heterosexual by having kids, propagate the gay gene. If they just let gay people be gay, then they would stop, breeding, and there'd be less gay people. And do any of those subjects, would you like to talk a little bit about that and to kind of give people an idea what it is that you tackle?
Sure. The last one is called the homophobic paradox, and there's an evolutionary researcher at I guess he's at University of Knoxville, Tennessee, called Sergey Gavrilets, and he explained it to me. He said if you design a model for the propagation of gay genes, and you have a more homophobic and repressive cultural environment, that causes the genes to proliferate more in the evolutionary game theory model, because people are avoiding the prescriptions of their society by having heterosexual marriages just for show, and they end up having kids more, even though they have gay relationships on the side. So I thought there was a sort of poetic justice and beauty to that homophobes propagate homosexual genes more than tolerance does, because it's that beautiful backfiring that occurs from their repression.
Just to jump in with one other point, there's also lots of things that are inherited for multifactorial reasons, and that may associate with other altruistic or positive community aspects that also keep it around. So it's probably, it may be a lot more complicated than that because we don't have a full handle.
Well, we don't know that there's a single gay gene exactly. That's something that's been researched, and there's evidence of heritability, but there's evidence of heritability for lots of things that are clearly multifactorial. I mean, like intelligence, for instance, is heritable to a certain degree, but there's no gene for intelligence. There's so many genes that are all interacting. So it could be that for homosexuality as well, and it actually could be epigenetic or developmental in the embryonic phase. So there's some research recently I've seen about, because I think you're more likely to be gay if you have lots of older brothers. So it can be an effect of the mother's body adapting to suppress testosterone over the course of multiple pregnancies, and then they become more and more likely to end up being very low testosterone, which ends up changing the brain chemistry towards being attracted to the same sex. So,
and we also see it across multiple species, so it can't just be cultural. There has to be more to it.
For sure, yeah. But that's where the game theory modeling stuff, that can help understand a context in which evolution is likely to lead to an outcome. You always have to look for empirical evidence to confirm or disconfirm what the model shows, but the model is unequivocal. If there's a gay gene, and if the context is this homophobic repression thing that you see in a lot of socially conservative societies, the gay genes proliferate like crazy.
Yeah.
Sure. You want to follow up? And so he also asked you one about with the spider.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to have time to get into both the peacock and the rapper, but I would like to talk about the redback spider, because it does seem like a evolutionary contradiction, and you do kind of go into that in your art performance. And again, it's something that I think if people understood, that if they were to come and see you and they learned about it, would be of value. It certainly would interest me.
Well, I can answer both of them with one principle, which is why evolution is such a parsimonious theory, and it's really about the cost of mating. So in the redback spiders, the males have to be eaten by the females in order to mate. So the males are basically food. They don't encounter each other very much. So for a male to try to mate and escape from the female is evolutionarily less adaptive than to just allow himself to be captured. The females are like a dozen times larger than the males, and if the male's body can provide protein for the eggs that he's just inseminated, then he gets an evolutionary benefit from that. And if he leaves and tries to go mate again, because they're so widely dispersed, his chances of finding another female are almost nil. So evolution has sculpted their behavior so that the males don't try to escape, which means any male, the cost of mating is his life. Whereas with peacocks, the cost of mating is often their life as well, but in a much broader context, because those tails are so heavy and so costly and so conspicuous that the fact of having one means they're way more likely to die from predators than if they were a streamlined, inconspicuous, camouflaged bird. But the mating benefit is, of course, how impressed the females are with the tails, because the tail serves as an unfakeable signal of the genetic quality of the male, because they have to survive all these trials and tribulations and still have bandwidth left to display and mate. That means they've outcompeted their less fit competitors, and I think that's actually the function of bling as well. The function of bling in hip-hop is to display underlying traits of cleverness, strength, coalitional strength, and ingenuity, and just the ability. Like, the chain is a signal of the ability to acquire the wealth to buy the chain and to display the chain without having someone steal it from you. And when you understand that, then you actually, you're less prone to dismiss bling as pointless and frivolous, just luxury signaling. You actually see that there's an evolutionary logic to luxury signaling, not to mention the fact that it also has a clear mating benefit associated with it, as many rappers, I'm sure, could tell you.
Yeah, so for anybody that wants to understand this a little bit better, you can look up Baba's song, Gene's Eye View. And this gives wonderful examples in the medical realm of how you can have heterozygous. I don't know if you want to spend just maybe a minute about either cystic fibrosis or sickle cell, how that works.
Yeah, so that's another example of a genetic trade-off that leads to a sort of surprising conclusion, because we have this phenomenon, cystic fibrosis, where if you have a single CF gene, you don't suffer from CF. So that means it's a redundant, it's a recessive gene. The dominant one has the normal functioning protein, but if you end up with two CF genes, then you end up having this phenomenon that's usually deadly and creates all of these physiological problems and lung problems, and all, just is really horrible for people that experience it. So then people who experience it can legitimately ask, why is this happening? Why would evolution give our species the genes that produce this kind of experience, which is so detrimental? And it turns out the research is suggesting it's this thing called heterozygote advantage, which is that if you have one CF gene where you don't express any of the symptoms, you actually are protected against tuberculosis. And right now, tuberculosis is not killing many people in this part of the world, but there were times in Europe where tuberculosis was exterminating a third of the population when it spread in epidemics. And so if there was a protective effect of a single CF recessive gene, then that would have proliferated those genes in order to protect people from tuberculosis. And now we get a population on Earth that has way more of those CF recessive genes than it otherwise would. And that also suggests that it's going to reduce in prevalence now that tuberculosis isn't killing as many people. But that's cold comfort to somebody that's suffering it, and I think that's why I look more to genetic medicine level solutions, gene therapy, and here's a legitimate debate. If we've got CRISPR, I understand there's scientists in China now that are beginning to edit human genomes, and this is a heated debate for people. But if you were a scientist that said, I'm going to be able to edit out all of the CF recessive genes so no one gets cystic fibrosis anymore by just screening for them prenatally and editing the embryos on anyone that has an IVF pregnancy, it would be hard to argue that was a bad idea if they could really show that this was going to be an effective way to make sure no future generations ever get cystic fibrosis. So that I think those concrete examples are going to are going to be pretty hard to resist when it comes to the practical applications of genetic medicine, genetic engineering, and but of course with safety checks in place. But I also think the evolutionary view, it just helps to put perspective on why is this happening? Why me? No, you're not being punished by the gods. No, it's not for some greater good that you can't see necessarily. Although if you can find meaning in it that way, like if it makes you bond with family more or other sufferers, or people do find purpose in suffering due to their adaptive ability to reorient their lives around it.
We're about 4 minutes from being out, and I just wanted to.
Sorry, that was a long answer to a short question.
All right.
Check out the side view. It's on YouTube.
And throw out just 30 seconds. Then multi-drug resistant tuberculosis is becoming an issue again. So who knows how that's going to be? It does get very complicated if we start messing with genetics. Have we really figured out?
That's another evolutionary dynamic right there, isn't it? The drug resistance factor is the evolution of microbes.
But yeah, that's a whole fascinating topic. But it should be addressed scientifically. It shouldn't be religion dominates that. It should be scientists actually look, what are the risks, what are the benefits, what do we try to modify? We also do want to make sure we spend a few minutes on your current climate chaos.
I do, but I want to just follow up on this real quick, which is that, we talk about the human species, which has been around, obviously in their current form, not that long, but so I think, was it like 100 million years worth of evolution at work to get where we are. And people see things like diseases as necessarily a bad thing, when in reality, they could be leftover components of something that may have, if we branched off into a different avenue, would have been beneficial. For instance, I have high blood pressure. Certainly we don't want high blood pressure. It's not good for us. But I read a study somewhere that people who have high blood pressure actually succumb to hypothermia less than other people, that they actually operate physically better because their blood pressure is higher, in cold environments. So if I lived in an Arctic community after 10 million years, would my body, over time, would I be functioning better? So I think of it as, woe is me, I got high blood pressure, how bad it is. But from an evolutionary standpoint, it could be, not necessarily that it is, but it could become something beneficial, to my a million years down the line. And so people, think about these things in religious terms, but from a biological standpoint, it's completely benign. There is no good bad concept to it. So,
well, you can say it's bad for you, today in your current context of central heating and ample warm coats, but good and bad are relative to context, and environmental context is the key to understanding evolution. There's no such thing as absolute fitness in a vacuum. Fitness is always measured relatively against environmental context.
Exactly. We got 2 minutes, so Rob?
Yeah, I just say, it depends how far we go back for our last common ancestor, when we want to say our genes started getting selected as hominids. So let's talk about climate change for a few minutes. You just talked about environmental selection.
You got about a minute.
With climate change, things are going so quickly now. How can humans adapt to that, or are we in trouble if we don't address this in a non-evolutionary manner?
All right, let's solve climate change in 1 minute, shall we? Well, I think in the show I try to describe it as a collective action problem, akin to an arms race or a tragedy of the commons. So everybody is living a life that requires them to emit a certain amount of CO2, given the current suite of energy production technologies, and nobody is incentivized to be the first one to opt out of that. People who choose to have a very low carbon footprint lifestyle, they either have to spend a lot of money achieving that, which means it's a luxury that they're displaying. And you kind of think of it as a form of bling, actually, green bling, solar panels on your house, or either that, or they're living in extreme poverty. And you want to find someone with a really low carbon footprint. Sub-Saharan Africans can tell you all about that, but not many people here in the States are willing to volunteer to go live like that. Actually, we're trying to get them to enjoy more of the luxuries that we do. So, the solution is for people to voluntarily sign up to be collectively restrained, which is why I'm advocating for a price on carbon or carbon taxing in the show, because there's no individual solution to this. It's got to be a collective level solution, and governments are designed to help us implement collective level solutions when we can't get people to sign up. So
Mitt Romney famously called 47% of Americans freeloaders. What about the multinational corporations as pollution-free?
We're actually out of time. So we're actually out of time.
Freeloaders are the massive fossil fuel companies and the large corporations that want to pollute without paying their share.
All right, fair enough. And for whether you're skeptical or whether you're religious, make sure to see Baba's show. It will certainly change the way that you think. www.bababrinkman.com. And until next week, this has been Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. We'll check you out then. Thank you for watching. Or you'll check us out then. Thank you for watching.